Good afternoon, Peter. We are very privileged to have you with us this afternoon to share about your education service experience that you have gotten for the last 40 years. Perhaps for a start, could you just let us know, how did you know that God wanted you to join the teaching service? Can you describe how your faith first shaped your sense of calling into educational leadership as well?
Sure. A privilege and honor to be doing this. Actually, when I began schooling, I came to ACS. That time it was called Anglo-Chinese Junior School. And I entered the school as a Buddhist Taoist. Actually, I hated chapel, refused to sing the hymns because it had the word Jesus Christ. I went through that journey all the way through to the secondary school when I then joined the Boys Brigade, and kind of anti-Christian all that way. But when I was in Sec 2, I joined the Boys Brigade, and although there was chapel in school, it was during the Boys Brigade parade. At one of the parades when the speaker challenged us about our faith in God, our understanding of God, and there was an invitation to accept Jesus as my Savior. I don't know why, but that afternoon there was that tugging in my heart that who he was speaking about is true and real. And when the invitation was made to walk up to the altar and kneel at the altar to pray, I responded quite quickly. Although I had Buddha amulet around me, a statue, I had the Chinese Taoist, the yellow papers in my wallet, I just went up and I committed my life to Christ there and then. And that was a beginning of the transformation for me, because I felt very convicted about my faith in God, wanted to know more. So when I started reading the Bible, it became a discipline for me to understand more about God. And through that period of growing, because my family were Buddhist Taoists, I was basically an undercover Christian. I shared the same room with my mother and brother. So when I wake up in the morning to read my Bible, I couldn't switch on the light because in the house, in that room, there was only one light. And if I switched it on, it would, the whole room would be brightened. So I had to put a blanket over myself and use a torchlight to read the Bible. And actually that was very foundational for me, because it really pushed me to write a lot of my reflections in the diaries I had and grow in Christ. I grew on to become an NCO, went on to become a Boys Brigade officer, and through the process of running camps for the boys, I felt convicted to become a teacher. When I was 18, I was diagnosed with my eye disease, retinitis pigmentosa. At that point of time, I was told that I would lose my peripheral vision. I would lose night vision. Anyway, I signed up for IE, Institute of Education then, and in the medical form I had to complete, I reflected the eye disease as a medical condition. And so I went into IE. 1 month into IE, I received a letter from the Institute of Education to tell me that I was terminated from the program. I was surprised. I went to the registrar's office to ask why. The clerk then said, "You're terminated lah." That was it. And I went back to my classmates to tell them that I was terminated, but they were encouraging me, why don't you appeal? And that was what I wanted to do. So I appealed, but that night when I went home and I was praying, why God called me to apply to be a teacher and then have me terminated, But each time I prayed, the number 40 kept coming to me. And so I told God, I know the number 40 in the Bible, 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And then later in the evening when I was praying again, God reminded me that Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness too. So I said I will submit the application, and I said, God, I cannot be a teacher after 40 years, but 40 days I can wait. So I submitted the appeal, and I waited. And the days passed. I lived with my grandfather at the time. Every morning he would scold me for being a lazy bum, stay at home, do nothing. But I said I have a reason, so he just gritted his teeth and ignored me. Day 38, nothing happened. 39, still nothing. Day 40, I told God, this is it. It's either going to happen or not. And so that after that, at that time, a mailman comes twice a day. The morning delivery, about 10 something, he'll come. He had a whole stack of mail for everyone in my family but me. And in the afternoon, he normally comes at 4:30. So I was waiting for him. 4:30 came and went, and no mailman. And I was just praying then. I said, okay, God, this is it. And about 5:30, the mailman came ringing his bicycle bell, and he had one letter. And the letter was for me, from the Institute of Education. I opened it with trepidation. And the letter basically said they were still reviewing my appeal, but they will allow me to go back to IE to continue my studies until a decision was made. So to me that was one big confirmation. And then on Christmas Eve, I received a second letter from IE, and this time they said they would allow me to go back to study, and they reimburse me all the stipend that we were given up to that point of time. So wonderful confirmation from God that this was what He wanted me to be, be a teacher, and I really enjoyed my time, my 40 years.
When you have first heeded the call to be a teacher, did you have any idea what your career was going to look like?
Honestly, no. Actually, all I wanted to do was teach. So subsequently when there were other postings, especially to HQ, I was a bit surprised, and anywhere I went, and God continued to open doors and opportunities.
What spiritual disciplines helped sustain you amid the demands and pressures of being a school teacher and as a school leader?
I think for me, that discipline that I cultivated from the time I became a Christian, reading the Bible early in the morning. When I was in army, I also kept that routine, so I had to wake up even earlier. When I was doing my training, also waking up early to read the Bible. And that, to me, has been central. I would say all my life as a Christian, it's always been the most important thing, to spend my first half, sometimes an hour, hour and a half, with God, reading the Bible, praying, meditating, writing down my reflections, of what and how I should be as a Christian. So to me, that has been very foundational.
Okay. Can you recall an occasion when your faith influences the way you lead your staff, especially during challenging times?
Well, I wouldn't say it was a particularly difficult moment, but it was actually an inspiring moment for me. Because I had the habit of reading the Bible for the longest time. And when I was going to my last posting, as a principal. I maintained that. But that year, I attended the Elijah 7000 morning prayer. And Pastor Song from Church of Singapore was sharing about reading 10 chapters of the Bible each time. And I thought, hey, that's a novel idea. I've never done that. I'll read sections, I'll meditate, but to read 10 chapters, and so I started doing that. So at that point of time, when I was going to be posted out from ACS Park Road, I started to do that around about June, July. And one of the mornings, God told me, read Joshua 6. And I said, God, I know what Joshua 6 is. It's the walk around Jericho. And God, is that what you want me to do? So I felt impressed to call the ACS Junior and ACS Park Road fathers who have been journeying with me. I said, okay, God has called me to do this. Can you come and join me? A number of them said, okay, let us know when then. One of the weekdays, God said, this Saturday. So I text all of them. I said, okay, we're going to do it this Saturday. We'll meet at the car park opposite from Queensway, and then we'll prayer walk around the school and let God lead us. So we started doing that. And interestingly, each week we gathered to walk, more people came. By word of mouth, people from the churches nearby, students, their parents, teachers. By the last day of the walk, we had representatives from the ACS fathers through to the whole community that was there. It was for me very encouraging to go into my first posting in the non-Christian mission school, and then to be able to connect with the community and rally prayer for the school. And I think that for me was most encouraging, and also how it impacted the students.
How do you see education as a ministry rather than merely a profession?
I always saw it as a ministry. I mean, of course, it's a profession, it's a job. But as a Christian, I believe we ought to see it differently. I know we operate in a setting where education is secular. But as a Christian, I have an opportunity to live a life that testifies to who God is and what He does in my life. And it's been that journey for me. I mean, when I was a teacher, the students, without me saying I'm a Christian, especially those who are Christians, will come and ask, will want to come and seek counsel. And the opportunity to just be the blessing without professing or pronouncing, especially in a government setting.
Methodist schools speak a lot about holistic education. What does it mean to you to educate the whole child from a faith-based perspective?
Well, I started off by saying how, as a student or child when I was in school, I was rather anti-Christian. And I would say things then was probably more stifled, when I was a student. But I think things began to change in the 70s. Not so much that chapel was very much different, but there was more movement to encourage prayer or allow prayer, especially being in the boys' brigade at that point of time, being in groups to study the Bible together, guided by the BB seniors and officers. And I think the Methodist school supported that. And coming back later as a principal, being in the Methodist school allowed me to foster that spiritual atmosphere in a way that I think God used to advance whatever He wanted to do amongst Christian educators, amongst parents. So in ACS Junior, we could do chapel quite differently. Together with the Christian ministry staff, we could reach out to the children quite differently and organize things to engage them in worship, in prayer. And I think by the 2000s, things were moving quite differently in the church and school scene too. So I see that progression, in how we grow and demonstrate our faith in God, not just as individuals, but as a whole movement of the Methodist Church, the Methodist schools, and how each then could impact their students in its own way to draw them to a closer relationship to God. So in ACS Junior, I was privileged to be able to start the ACS Junior's Father's Prayer Group, and that eventually led to the ACS Father's Prayer Groups in all the ACS schools. So God orchestrates these moves, and I believe as a Christian, we just want to sense how He moves in His calling, and do our part. And in that way, be the blessing to the community that He places us in.
Have there been seasons where your faith was tested through leadership setbacks or criticism? How did you manage those?
I think for me, one of the most challenging periods of my life as a school leader was SARS. You remember how challenging, I mean, it's pre-COVID, and it was a nightmare, But I remember that during the period of time, that the Friday before, we had the ACS Junior sports meet, which was held at Ngee Polytechnic, And I was coming down the stairs to go and do the prize giving, and also to introduce the guest of honor. As I came down the stairs, I stumbled and my head crashed into one of the metal bars. So I got up and then carried on down. They handed me the mic. I was addressing everybody. Then the head of PE ran to me and said, "Mr. Tan, you're bleeding." And then blood was trickling down my eyes. Because I had a big gash, she handed me some gauze, and I ended my speech holding it. And I turned to my wife, "We got to go," so it was SARS. I didn't want to go to a hospital, so went to a clinic to have it stitched up, and then Monday went back to work, But during that period of time, everything was still in a flux. The MOE was trying to manage the situation. So everything was supposed to be very contained. But in ACS, you throw a coin, you probably bounce off 5 doctors at least. So I got a call one of the nights and from a doctor friend, one of my classmates, and said, "Peter, you have a case." And my heart sank. I asked him, "Are you sure?" He said, "His father is in. He's in too." And so the next morning, first thing I called my superintendent and told her, and she said, "Okay, we've not heard anything from from HQ and from you wait. So I waited, and I was like, it was already Friday, and we've got a weekend coming. What are we going to do? I have to manage the situation. Of course, word already started going around. I had to manage the class, the parents, the teachers, and it was, no, cannot say anything. I was like, it was a nightmare. So anyway, I went off, and I felt very uncomfortable about it because I had built my leadership based on honesty as a key principle, and here I was not telling my teachers, and the parents everything. It was very uncomfortable. So anyway, I told Matsu I had a bad fall. I need earlier that end of last week, and I having a bad headache. So I said I left for home. Then at 10:30 that night or thereabouts, she called me and said, "Peter, confirm." I said, "I told you so." I had to go down at 11 o'clock, call my everybody, whoever did the cleaning and everything. And then interestingly, that Saturday was the ACS Juniors Father's Prayer, and we prayed for the school. And that was a very difficult period because I used to write letters to the parents regularly on all matters. And then this was such a major matter, and I cannot say anything. I just had to manage the situation. I cannot announce, publicly. So I kept it quiet, and we just managed as every school was supposed to, And my staff were like looking at me and like, what's going on? It was a very challenging time, but God was good. The news came to interview me. News got out, and they interviewed me, and it was one of the worst interviews I ever had to do because they also intentionally, when I relooked at that point, I could still see, the video at that time, the recording at that time, I was so darkened, I was like some evil man.
But it was amazing. I mean, you navigated through injuries, through uncertainties, and then you have to actually bring the whole school into some form of sanity and normalcy in the midst of SARS. I think that was very tough. I remember those times too, yes.
It was a nightmare. But God was good. I mean, so that I think was the around the period of Good Friday or Easter, I received a call from the mother, and the mother said, "He's cleared," and I tell you, I was so elated. I went on the PA and immediately announced to the whole school. I mean, by then they knew, I had to tell them, and as I managed it, and announced to the whole school, he's cleared. Oh, I tell you, the cheer from the whole school was just amazing, But because of that, the parents had not known how much the teachers were doing. I mean, it was a two-session school. Every teachers had to report by 6 a.m. in the morning, set up everything, do all the screenings and everything, and then the afternoon session, the whole thing went, start all over again. So after that, the parents called me and said, can we bless your teachers with breakfast and lunch? And I tell you, for a couple of weeks, non-stop, we had food coming in every morning and every afternoon, because they knew the teachers were so busy manning stations, check temperature, checks the whole works, and I think it strengthened the community.
You once described yourself as working with young people in the trenches, pleading for the lives of students that had been so badly damaged. What made you arrive at this metaphor?
I would say that actually the imagery came to me when I had to engage one of my primary 5 boys. This was a very cheeky and naughty boy. But one day the teacher brought him to me and said, "Mr. Tan, look at him." And he had marks all on his legs. And I was like, "How many times did your father hit you?" And he told me, "I stopped counting after 100. I was aghast. I called the father in and I told him, "If you ever do this again, I will report you." But he was just one of them. Both in secondary, my 2 secondary schools, I would say just the physical abuse, But a lot of times there's a lot of mental abuse, you know, and actually the children suffer through it. At times they come and talk to us. You know, I've been privileged to have students come in to share and their challenges, and then to try to figure out how we can help them, how we can manage them so that they can go through life with hope. You know, I mean, not all of us have wonderful parents. I certainly didn't have a very good father. I know what a lot of them would be going through. You know, I was also whipped. I even had a cigarette butt poked into my face by my father when he got angry with me. You know, so I can imagine a lot of children with less loving parents may do things that are harmful to the children. And if we can build systems, ways to get around, you know, and so interestingly, I volunteered that year. There was a newspaper article to ask if people wanted to volunteer. The Ministry of Community, Youth and Sports, I think at that time, they were reviewing the legislation for young people and women. So I wrote in and asked and said I'll volunteer. You know, and that eventually led to an opportunity for me to meet with Jason Wong, who eventually became the one who started Elijah 7000. Interesting meeting, because the first time he came to my office, I told myself, this meeting is going to be short. You know, because Jason is very prim, very proper. We ended up having a 3-hour conversation because both of us shared our hearts. I heard his heart for young people in the community who were going through all the difficulties and challenges, and I was thinking about what I could do as an educator, as a principal with fellow principals, what we could do to make a difference for our young people in community.
You have often said that God sees the tears and hears the pleading prayers. What role does prayer play in your leadership, personally and in the community? What happens when you prayed so hard for something and it did not happen? How does this affect your journey with God?
I guess the biggest thing that I've prayed for that has not happened is my own eyesight. You know, in fact, it's gotten worse over the years. You know, and it is challenging. You know, when you do pray for many other people, and God does bring resolutions for them. I thank God that in all my years I never lost a student to illness or any deaths or anything like that. But I had a student who eventually finished school and lost his battle to leukemia. You know, and that was tough for me. But God is in control. You know, and we all have that opportunity, that privilege to cry before Him, to intercede. But God has His purpose for all things. And I know that despite my blindness, He has been able to use me, you know, and in a way to continue to encourage others. So I do engage with people who, especially young people, who are diagnosed with degenerative eye diseases because of others who know me, and they connect, and I get to talk to them, I get to encourage them, get to journey with them. And by God's grace, I'm going to start up a group to focus on giving support and help to people who have visual impairment and their caregivers. Because from my interactions with this group of people, and my own experience and provisions from the medical fraternity, I believe this is also how God can work through each of us. You know, if we look beyond ourselves, God can use us to be a blessing to others.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I think you have shared how an unanswered prayer, like your own eyesight, has actually now led to another open door of ministry for those who are visually impaired. And so let's talk about some of them. Let's talk about fathers and parents, ACS, Fathers Prayer Groups, Elijah 7000, and so on. Why did you focus on parents, and in particular, fathers?
You know, if you go to any schools with prayer movements, you see mothers. You know, even when I was in the ACS schools, it was mostly the mothers who attended.
Right.
And so when I started the ACS Juniors Fathers Prayer Group in 2001, I felt fathers need to come to pray, because God has appointed fathers to be the head of the household. And if the head of the household doesn't pray, something's wrong, something's missing, you know. And so that year I remember I wrote to the school, the invitation to fathers to come to pray. And I spoke to a few Christian fathers I knew who were in ACS Junior and said, come, you know. Well, the first gathering we had, 12 fathers showed up, which was for me wonderful. You know, I was man of little faith then. In my 18 years in ACS, there was never a fathers prayer group meeting, whether in junior or Barker, where we had less than 12 fathers. It was at least 12, if not 20, 30. You know, so it was tremendously encouraging for me. You know, Malachi 4, 5, and 6 challenges us that if we turn our hearts to the children will turn their hearts to us, you know, and eventually we all turn our hearts to God, you know. So I think fathers play a very critical role. The praying parents unite, and you know, we now have about 139 praying groups throughout Singapore, you know, government as well as Christian mission schools. Just praying, you know, I think that's something all of us can do, coming together to pray, right? And just to be the blessing to the next generation.
Yes, and thank you for reiterating the fact that your intention really was to get the fathers to pray and parents to pray and to turn their hearts toward their children. And I think Elijah 7000 also talks about using that as well to even encourage the families to help the children to counter societal decay. And with that, I think we look at the challenges of school leaders as well. You have also been instrumental in setting up prayer meetings for Christian educators and school leaders. Why do you see that there's a need for Christian leaders to lead from their knees, to lead from bended knees?
You know, as a Christian school leader yourself too, you know, I'm sure you experienced that. Right? There are situations we sometimes can't even share with other people, right? At best, our vice principals. And so, and as I engage with other Christian school leaders, because of the relationship we have, sometimes they say, can you pray for me? And over time, I began to feel that, why are we so desperate? Why don't we come together? And actually a small group of us, mostly the Methodist school principals of that time, people like Mrs. Mabel Wee, Richard Lim, you know, we came together and said, hey, why don't we come together and pray and also equip ourselves? You know, so we started to do that, and it slowly grew. Then with use of technology, we could connect more Christian school leaders to come on board and you know, just to pray together, you know. And actually we had that for the first few years, meeting once a month, coming together as Christian school leaders to pray for our schools, to pray for each other, to pray for what God would do for Singapore. Many can stand up to the call and be used by God to be a blessing. And I think we all know the length and breadth of how things can go. So we work within what we can do, and be a source of encouragement.
A Christian educator can be posted to a government school where we maintain a strictly secular approach to education because we do prioritize racial and religious harmony. So what would be one advice that you would give to fellow Christian colleagues who are working in non-mission schools?
I was very thankful that my last posting was to a government school, because I had been in ACS Junior, then ACS Park Road. And for me to experience what you just asked, it's very real, right? In the two ACS schools, I could just pray,
Yes.
But in the government school, I couldn't do that openly, and I have to be even more mindful of the different groups of people with their beliefs, and so it's not something that where we cannot be real, because I don't announce to the people that I'm a Christian, but I think our example, our conduct, the way we speak, the way we engage our students, we engage our staff, I think that speaks even more, and I feel that is a difference that we can make. Towards the end of my time in Queensway, a friend was going to visit me, and then we went to my office, and he told me, "Peter, I've never seen this." I said, "I've never seen a school servant so excited to see the principal come back." When he saw the car, he said, "Oh, 校长来了, 校长来了." And actually, I've interacted with the gentleman in conversations, showing care, asking about his well-being. I think all of us can do that, whether we are Christians or not. And I'm sure all of us do that. But also, in the way we do not put people down, and encourage people. I'm glad even through MOE surveys of the school climate and all that, that there has been a positive change over the years, and bringing about a culture change, which I believe as a Christian we can do even more. After all, Jesus calls us to be the salt of the earth. We have to be the light to the nation, and as a Christian, I don't have to announce it. I've never announced myself as a Christian. Even in engaging with Malay students, Indian parents, or who are of a different faith, we don't have to talk about our religious beliefs or faiths, but really about what's important for the child and the family, and that perspective we bring. But especially as a Christian principle, we have 1,000-year history of the principle of raising families and children. So how we bring that to bear to be that blessing.
Yeah. What advice, Peter, with your 40 years of experience, what advice would you give to our emerging leaders and our Christian educators so that they can continue to develop early in a journey with God as they pursue on Christian education?
Read the Bible and pray. I don't think there's anything else that is more important we can do. That we read God's word and pray.
You wrote the book Not by Sight and shared your struggles with the failure of your eyesight and blindness. Where do you sense God is leading you now in this phase of your life?
The interesting thing is actually the year after I retired, my eyesight really went south. I can only imagine it possibly go worse, unless God intervenes in some miraculous way. So moving forward, seeing how God can continue to use me as a blessing to my family, my children and grandchildren, and to the community. I mean, I don't know how many years I would have to be able to do that, but by God's grace, He's provided us technology, so I'm still able to share through all the different platforms that technology allows. I still preach at churches. I have a few very wonderful mentees who help me do all the PowerPoints, so long as my memory holds out and God can continue to use me. And then earlier on I shared about starting a support group with Caring's SG to look into the needs of people with visual impairments and their caregivers.
Peter, if you were to live your life all over again and to know that you would arrive at this point where the loss of eyesight becomes a reality, what will you do? Will you do the things that you've always done, or will you do them differently?
Well, I don't think I will live my life any differently, because when I first came to know of my eye condition, I didn't know what it could become. And interestingly, God allowed me to serve all my years with relatively workable eyesight, although the last few years were more challenging. God has His divine timing and purpose for all things. I was very blessed. For me, it's been a blast. If I live my life all over again, I would do the same things I would have done, because of all the friendships, the people that I've come to know, the different groups like Elijah 7000, Methodist, Fathers Movement, the different prayer groups. I mean, I've gotten the opportunity to meet and engage with so many people that I would never have had, except for all the experiences that I've been through. So I'm very thankful to God for what He has blessed me with. I just pray that I can continue to serve Him to the very best of my ability until the day He chooses to call me home.
Thank you for the timely reminder that we do not live by sight nor by might, but by power and by my Spirit, says the Lord. And as we come towards this close of this conversation, it is very clear that your 40 years of experience have shaped many lives and many communities. While one chapter closed, it's now a transition to a new season for you. And it is this new season that we want to wish you the very best. And if I were to perhaps use a metaphor for you, you had been like a farmer sowing and watering and laboring for the seeds that you have sown. And now is perhaps a season for you to stand at a hilltop and watch how this garden has flourished, far beyond what you have started with. The seeds you have sown and watered have now grown in their own season, and they have now also become impactful in their own ways. So may this season be to you a season for you to rediscover new joy and renewal. May it be a time when your influence takes on a different dimension, no less profound, but still essential and life-giving. We wish you the very best. We wish you good health and great satisfaction, knowing that this new season, God will continue to bless you in many, many ways. So thank you, Peter, for this very lovely conversation.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you.